Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the seventh episode of PsyTalks with Teachers, and I'm your host, Ms. Basha, Director at ICHARS and ICHARS Support Foundation. Today we have with us Dr. Shoma Chakrawarty to talk about positive psychology. I would like to quickly introduce our organization, which is ICHARS, Institute of Clinical Hypnosis and Related Sciences, organization dedicated to behavioral, emotional, mental growth for individuals from all areas of society through education, intervention, and guidance. Our institute is based on a solid value system of quality and philosophy of positive psychology, which is also one of our topic today, which is also our topic today. And we also believe that therapy is not all about focusing on the weakness, but it is also about helping people find their strengths and apply those strengths. Before we begin, I would like to also mention our MHP Challenge, an initiative by mental health practitioner. MHP Challenge is about visit a mental health practitioner, requesting people to seek help before it's too late. I would also like to request everyone who's watching us to feel free to ask any kind of questions that you have in the comment section, and I'll surely take it up with Shuma being our guest for today and being the expert on the subject. And you can also start a watch party on Facebook so that your friends and family can benefit out of the session. So, bit about Shoma. She is Dr. Shoma Chakrawarty, serves as an assistant professor in the PG Department of Psychology at Maniben Nanavati Women's College, affiliated to Ascendity University, Mumbai. So, yeah, both of the organization colleges are in Mumbai. She holds a master's in clinical psychology and a doctorate in the broad area of psychosocial oncology. She's currently in training in an advanced diploma in counseling. A drive to understand, for her, a drive to understand what is happening with people as they transverse through their journey in their life is integral to her. Teaching, research, therapy are related pursuits in that sense. She enjoys working with young adults, families, and people dealing with life course challenges like caregiving or grief. So, a very warm welcome, Shoma, to you on Psych Talks with Teacher. We are pleasure to have you here. And yeah, if you just can go ahead with your quick introduction from your end, if you want to add something, feel free, and then we go ahead with our question and answers.
Right. So, first of all, good evening to you and to all the people who are on this session. And I'd like to thank you, Mizwa, for finding me out of nowhere and inviting me to talk to students. I have been teaching for about 5-6 years, and I've taught in multiple cities down south. And I love the feeling of being in touch with students and new ideas. Sometimes you get to learn so much with students; they get to learn with you, and I'm glad that we're able to do this online. So yeah, let's get
Thank you.
started.
Lovely. So let's go with the topic about positive psychology. What would be an introduction of positive psychology from your end? How would you define it?
Right. So I think essentially the idea of positive psychology is not new. It's just that we as a culture, as a society, in terms of even worldview, we've all become so focused on looking at what's the problem. So child throws a tantrum, what's the problem? Okay, if somebody's failing an exam, what's the problem? When there's something happening in a relationship, what's the problem? This problem focused nature of thinking and seeing the world has become absolutely ingrained in us, and of course for reasons. Usually we tend to focus on the darker sides of life, but with positive psychology and this whole thing becoming so prominent now, you actually have a chance to study what's right about life, what's good about people, what's a fulfilling life made of, and how do we get to making those things actionable in our lives. So just to speak very briefly, positive psychology isn't new. Like I said, everybody knows Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy, and he spoke about the term positive psychology for the first time in 1954. But it took us 50 years from then to actually have a field called positive psychology, all thanks to Martin Seligman. And so, if you sort of get to listen to his speech at the APA conference that year, students I think do have access. Otherwise, there are articles on it. And he says, positive psychology had three missions. One, of course, was to cure mental illness, but the other two were to understand what it is to nurture genius, and what was the third one? It was to understand what makes for a fulfilling life. But then the world wars happened, and all of the focus in terms of funding and research and even clinical psychology as a discipline emerged in the late 40s, when the Veterans Administration and the NIMH was set up. And we made great strides in understanding depression, in understanding schizophrenia, in understanding the causes of all of that. But somehow the focus on the good part of life and the good part of people got completely left behind. So Seligman says that psychology forgot its other two missions, and then I think in time, and as sort of there was so much development in technology, I think anything in psychology is always related to changes in the community and changes in technology. And as there was growth and prosperity, I think people started asking the big question that what makes my life meaningful, and that's how this whole thing came about. So yeah.
Lovely. So, if there are certain principles, like most of the concepts do have certain principles, so would there be principles in positive psychology? And if there are, can you please throw some light on that so that it becomes easier for our audience to relate to it?
Right. I think the keywords, I think, or the best, or the sort of fundamental principle of positive psychology is what is the best of us human beings? What is the best of humanity? That's what Seligman calls it. So this goes across levels. So of course it looks at what makes moments of your day good. For instance, the state of happiness, the state of flow when I'm working and I'm really engaged in something. So the best of positive psychological states of being. Then we move into what traits, some traits which make us more humane. So humility, courage. Right now, if you think of COVID, and when you see doctors on the front line doing the kind of work they are doing, putting their life at risk, money doesn't explain that, but maybe moral courage does, right? So
Yes.
again, traits like that, traits like mindfulness, self-compassion, which now we are speaking about so much, but these have actually been parts of our culture and have huge beneficial effects on mental health and well-being. So it looks at all of these things which add meaning, add purpose, add that it's called life above sub-zero. Usually we are looking at how to get here, how to get there. Positive psychology is saying if you are here, what would you strive for part ahead? So what are the good things that lie in life ahead? It also says let's not look at pathogenesis. I think that's a fundamental sort of assumption here again, that we know enough about what's making people sick, but do we know what makes people thrive? So there is something called immunity that we all have, right? And so if 5 people are affected with the same virus, right now we are seeing different people's ambient levels of immunity decide how much they will suffer. So psychology of sort of those traits, those qualities which give you psychological immunity. So of course everyone can be experiencing or susceptible to depression, but if I have an ability to understand my negative emotions and shift, or if I'm able to look at myself kindly, or if I am able to leverage social support, find meaning, then these are buffers against mental health. And that is also a way of doing mental health. It doesn't have to involve getting sick, getting treatment, falling in there, and then pulling yourself out. Rather, it looks at looking at what keeps you salutary, which is growth oriented, not disease oriented. So I think these are two fundamental things to psychology, positive.
Lovely, lovely. I think you very well put it across. And do you actually take on one-on-one sessions also besides your educative side?
Right. So I think I forgot the bio slightly dated. I finished my advanced diploma in counseling and I'm currently taking
Okay,
clients.
okay, okay. Yeah, yeah. Because since you were explaining it, I thought let me just check with you. Lovely. I think so. Since we are doing this, entire session for psychology students, the budding psychologists, and for their deeper understanding for the subject, and what are the current trends that works in this field also, that is also something that we can put light to. So if I had to ask you, what is the importance of learning positive psychology for a psychology student or a practitioner who's already practicing?
So importance for students, I think it really provides an alternative way of looking at mental health. Like I said, I mean, if you have to get into any of our current training programs, psychopathology, counseling, clinical psychology, psychiatry, these are all very disease-oriented models. And they are so, because that is the practical need of the field, but nothing has stopped us from bringing a strengths-based focus into work. So,
Right.
right now when I have sometimes I make them take a values and action survey, which is one of the VIA strengths and action kind of survey. And we are not used to having conversations like that. So I mean, I don't know how many of us were raised thinking, okay, what's your most important value? So when someone gets a test and they see it's honesty or it's forgiveness, they are actually seeing their strength the first time. Sometimes they haven't seen it in
Right.
operation. They may know that they are honest, but exploration of strengths and including that idea that you have these problems, yeah, but you also have these strengths. For instance, when you see someone with a disability or when you see somebody with cancer, we see them as a person with disability or a person with an illness, but that person also has resilience, and that's what is allowing them to get up every single day and move on in their life. But that's not what comes to mind first, and that's the sad part, because people are a complex combination of all of these traits, experience, everything that they have together. But we are always working with the shadow side, and we are not working with all of these things that we can actually leverage within them. If it is a psychological immunity factor, if you incorporate that into practice, whether you're an existing practitioner, whether you're a trainee practitioner, so I think that's one thing. I think secondly, positive psychology is such a nice thing to study, because you can always, like I tell my students the whole time, personalize. Okay, you're studying gratitude, try maintaining a gratitude journal. Studying resilience, go interview somebody in your family who's had a very tough life. Like last year, that's what we did according to, we have these internal assessment things. So I
Right.
sent the whole bunch of 60 girls out in the field to interview people who were resilient. So somebody ended up in a cafe run by a student with Down syndrome. Somebody ended up interviewing somebody who had lost both parents and become a fashion designer still. So that also helps you understand the trajectory that people have to take for resilience to show. It's not like regular stress and coping, right? So I
Right.
think this is one of those subjects which you can see operate all through in life, and that makes it very interesting for students to study it, to apply it to their world, apply it to themselves. I mean, not all subjects can you do that. So, yeah.
Right. Yes, it does make sense. And what do you think would be the challenges that they face while studying this subject?
Right. So, yeah, as much as it's a very nice thing to study, first of all, for like standard things, it's not an easy paper to answer. So, a lot of students feel like, I learned everything. How do I put it all together? So, that happens because we're talking about things to do with life. And so, happiness sounds like subjective well being, sounds like flourishing, sounds like quality of life. But in positive psychology, there are different nuances to each. So, studying it is challenging because in an attempt to make it real to life, a lot of concepts overlap. So that's one problem. I think apart from that as well, it's a very nuanced subject. And so if someone enters it with the mindset of, how many features go here, how many definitions here, what is the key study here, it doesn't help the process, because it's more about, understanding what that person thought when they wrote about this concept. So that's one part that's a problem. I think another thing that's a little difficult is we have not really lived in a time when this idea wasn't there. So we don't remember a time when mental health stigma was not spoken out. Students who are studying now, probably not so much. So I think we don't have a way to understand what a non-strengths perspective is. So sometimes I ask students to imagine what it would have been like 100 years back if there was, like, that time there was no positive psychology. I think the point is, although it's very, very interesting, it's not very easy to condense the concepts into workable formats. What does help is if you study about it in research. So that's something I suggest to students, and go read the top 25 papers that are coming out. Right now, there are so many studies coming out on doctors working in frontline, and how they are being resilient in the face of trauma. I think sometimes when you see the concepts operationalized in life, in research, you can see positive psychology being applied everywhere, from like positive schooling to positive youth development to psychotherapy to positive aging. So when you see these concepts in application, sometimes you understand how it would actually pan out rather than just from a textbook.
Very well. So, yeah, my next question to that would be that what would be the tips that you give to the students to overcome these challenges? Like when you said about research.
Right. So apart from research, I think it's important to respect how that subject came in, right? So this subject came in when people started thinking originally, and there are some classic studies to do with each. So there are classic studies in resilience done by Maston and Reed. There'll be studies with each area. So I often ask people to focus on that study first. Some other things I ask them to do is probably to sort of look at the concept as a whole, be critical, apply the concept to your own society. So something like individualism works very well in the West, right? Autonomy,
Hmm.
authenticity
Hmm.
works very well in the West. But when you bring the same concept over here, we realize that that can actually be a problem in our society because we're very collectivistic. Sometimes when we are critical of the concept, when we have understood where it emerged from, when we have mapped it out, I think people are able to personalize it and take how they understand it for themselves and then write it out. Some other things that I really suggest people do is, so there's a very interesting site and a center called the Positive Psychology Program. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you sign up with them, you get newsletters, you get positive psychology tools. Sometimes you get invited to events and webinars and all that. That helps because suddenly, and this is a live field. Like, I don't think we have so much scope to enjoy clinical psychology like this because a lot of the work in the field is done. Positive psychology is unfolding right now. So students actually get to be a part of like the latest kind of things that are coming up. You can get emails and you'll get the latest tools. Similarly, if you follow these pages on Instagram right now, people are talking about ikigai. Okay, how
Yeah.
passion, vocation, all of these things can be combined, which is very, very relatable to them. So I think if you engage with the subject and allow yourself to change, automatically your learning is deeper. It's not something you should
True.
probably do for marks, but you should do it to just allow yourself to change. Yeah.
Right. Like that's really nice of you. Um, so let's just say a quick hi to all of people who are there on Facebook Live, who are with us live. Hi everyone, welcome to the session, and I hope my voice or ma'am's voice is clear now. I understood that. I hope we are clear now. And feel free to ask any questions that you have. Um, and yes, hi Zeenat, hi Ganesh, Pooja, Sanjana, Nathan. Hello everyone, feel free to ask questions. We have Shomoyer who is all about positive psychology that you have. She will be able to guide us there, right? And the next question that goes is what would what would be your suggestion to make the subject more interesting? As I've already said, okay, can we combine it with that? If they had to study for the exams, what would be the tips that you would give them?
Um, no substitute for reading. That's a complete teacher answer, I know. But the big risk is when we don't read this paper, we answer it very generally, and then your teachers don't give you marks. So that's something that I uniformly say. Remember that although these concepts sound overlapping, they are still distinct. So knowing each for itself. Sometimes mind mapping that concept helps. Sometimes I ask people to visualize it. That helps. Knowing some key studies because we always look for people who remember the study and bring it in the paper. If you are able to give examples, that also helps because sometimes that's the way we know that somebody is applying it to themselves. All of these concepts are unique actually, and all of these concepts unfold within a certain trajectory. So, like I said, for resilience, the idea is that some insane stressor happens to you. Most people bounce back. Someone who's resilient bounces back higher than normal. Similarly, for positive emotions, the broaden and build theory says, we say when I'm happy, I'm expansive. But the theory uses technical words like, it increases your thoughts and momentary action repertoires. When we see someone who's got these words in place, automatically we feel like someone who knows it. So, completely a fan of studying, of course, from the basics, picking up key terms, giving original example, showing that you've done your research. The research doesn't have to be boring also, actually, Misbah. Like, I know it sounds like, teachers are always saying go study. Today you have something like TED Talks, right? So, when you go there
Yes.
and you see a lady on a a wheelchair conquering the world, or when you go and read this talk about somebody who says, I've lived as a man and a woman, and these have been my experiences. Those are interesting ways to get the concepts into your head, and once you know it in your head, it will come out on paper. So I
True.
think, using the vast variety of tools that we have, whether it's research, whether it's questionnaires, tools, TED Talks, movies, a lot of case studies can be done just via movies. If you've seen The Beautiful
Right.
Mind, how this person comes back from schizophrenia, it helps you understand how it would be to live that experience. So.
Lovely. Okay, let me see if we have questions. I think we are yet not having any questions, but yeah, let's go to our questions. And so, how does positive psychology differ from other approaches? If you had to talk about the other approaches that are there.
So specifically, any other paper? Do you mean?
Any other paper or any other approaches for that matter, humanistic or a cognitive, or if in that understanding.
Right. So I think it differs, of course, apart from the very, very growth-oriented approach. I think it takes somebody's entire life into perspective. Usually, I think the way we study concepts, if you study sociology, you study prejudice on its own. You study something on its own. But I think what happens with positive psychology is you can see it's like chronicles of people who've lived and exemplified that trait or exemplified that idea. So I feel like you get to see the whole perspective. The second thing is it allows you to use different lenses, I think. So you can sort of look at a socio-cultural way of positive psychology. You look at the influence or how Eastern societies and Western societies look at hope. So it allows you to also see that concept from your society. I don't think we do that so much for clinical psychology. It's a predominantly Western model, right? This, I think we have the scope to apply a lifespan lens, apply a society and culture lens, apply an East versus West lens, apply a value-based lens, which are not things that we get to do otherwise. Another thing is that uh, some parts of it, of course, are like very, very, like I said, nuanced, but there is also this sense of something called, so if you've studied wisdom or if you've studied courage, I don't think you get to study these concepts in any other area. You get to do that only over here. It also takes into account who you are in your life at that moment. So there are these stages that you work with in terms of research. Also, you can use these stages again when you study positive psychology. You get to see who that person is in that stage of life. With mental illness and with clinical work, you don't get to do that as much. Other differences, of course, research is ongoing, so you get to study a lot more things that are fluid right now. I think with clinical work, those are already set. With sociology, classic studies are all there for you. Here, I think the field is still very light because it is hardly 20 years old, the field. So I think there's more scope of work here as well compared to other fields.
Okay. So since you've mentioned certain differences within the West approach and our approach to it, can you just share a few examples for students to understand, or the layman who's there watching us to understand about the differences, how positive psychology is, what is it exploring more in terms of other approaches? The ones that you
So actually,
mentioned,
I
can
think
you
the
have
best
certain
way to
examples on that?
look at how lay people would see a concept and how positive psychology sees a concept, right? So if I ask somebody what they want in life, people would generally say happiness. I mean, I want to be happy. Right?
Yeah,
All of us want to be
yeah, yeah.
happy. So positive psychology took that question and it actually went ahead and did studies to see, what makes people happy. At base, we would think money. Sometimes we think money. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't have money, that money would make you happy. That's what they found out. So they went and they did studies in countries across, and it's a very open field. So they do studies in Pakistan, they do studies in India, Japan, everywhere. It's not centered in the West. So when they did these studies, they said when you didn't have money, money mattered. But after a point,
Yeah,
when you have enough money, it diminishing marginal utility, so it stops counting to you. So then they understood that it wasn't about happiness; it was happiness plus meaning. Something in my life that lends me meaning, which is a sensation that so many of us, I mean, we relate to it, right? We're doing something we like, but kuch missing hai. So then they arrived at this idea of subjective well-being, which was money, enough for happiness, plus a sense of meaning in my life that was subjective. Similarly, they've
Lovely.
taken and put a different twist to some other things. So I'm sure there are a lot of students, right? And so then they have these ideas. So when we get into a relationship in our 20s, you think, it's my destiny. You met the person who's your other half and you just fit perfectly, etc. So those things carry on in people's minds in a big way. And when you hit a conflict, now if it is a destiny thing, then if you have a conflict, destiny conflict are not aligning. So they have this idea of relationship growth, saying, you don't have to think of your relationship as a romantic destiny paradigm. Think of it as a relationship growth paradigm. So when you hit a frustration, you work through it. You don't stop. You don't stop that relationship. So I think they've taken a
Mhm.
lot of these very regular things in life and put a sense of comprehensibility, which is not related to theory, which is how it would help people see it in life. Okay, how do I deal with this? So when um, I think there was another thing that I was reading about. So yeah, mindfulness. So there are studies that
Mhm.
they've done where so what mindfulness says is, I mean, stay with the moment. If I'm having an interesting conversation with my partner, and then I get a phone call today, 99% of us would take that phone call, right?
Right.
So they basically studied this as automaticity, which is, I do things which come automatically to me. And they said that if there was a novelty, so if your phone's ringtone was different or your partner was saying something new, there was something different in the room, then you would not take the call. So they look at the role of novelty, and it's in mindfulness, it's called a beginner's mind. So they look at the role of these factors in like common everyday behaviors, very, very simple, real to life studies. They're not taking people to a lab. They are doing the studies in these contexts, right? And they're showing you
Right.
how it translates into insight. And this insight is not even research driven, it's available for all of us. It doesn't even have to be a psychology student. Anyone can take up this and take a questionnaire for themselves and know themselves better. And what's the best way for psychology to reach out to people except for this, when it's applicable to you, when it's relatable to you, when it's personalizable to you. So
Right.
yeah.
Very well. I think that makes a lot of sense for us. Let me just check. Um, so what would be something that we keep in mind with caution as we practice and apply positive psychology to our life?
Right. So this is very interesting, and I say this with good reasons. So there's nothing wrong with, right? I mean, that's completely what this field is about. It's not about thinking positively, but it's thinking about life in ways which take you further. But there is a reason that there are problematic things in life, and problems happen in life because there are lessons for us in there sometimes, even if we don't want those lessons at that time. Now, I sometimes now when I go online on Instagram and I see everyone saying, you go girl, you do this, and be strong and this and that, it I start to wonder, because I work in the field and I'm sensitive to how messaging happens. When you say that to people and someone's having a bad day, and being positive is not helping them. Okay, we are causing
Yes.
them more distress by saying that this simple message should fit in and make you feel better. Which is why I think,
Right.
again, that's why I also say for students, personalize it. If a gratitude practice doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you, and it's okay, because the messaging about everything has become so should na? Mindfulness one for all, everybody should practice mindfulness. Gratitude
Yeah. Right.
journaling, everyone should be doing it. So when we do that, we are sort of pushing in toxic positivity. Not everyone has to feel that way. I don't have to feel like that every day, and it's okay for people to not put a positive spin in things. But the way people speak about it, we actually have started bypassing distress. So someone says something sad, we say, oh, let's try this, oh, let's do that, try this, it will help you. Let the person stay with their distress, because distress also has a role. Positive psychology has never said you don't have to feel sad. And the second thing that this ties in even further to is the Pollyanna principle, which is somebody who's always happy, always joyous, always in like glorious sort of states of rapture. Life isn't like that, and everyone's going to have bad days. So
True.
sometimes overstating this, and there's a very beautiful paper called Pitfalls and Promises of Positive Psychology, which goes into explaining these pitfalls, saying, there's so much research about it, which is great, but we still don't know what difference it's making. In fact, now we have like 20 different concepts, and we still can't say what each is doing for us. In some studies, yeah, there is findings. We know that logically it makes sense, but it's not an en masse thing. It's not a one size fits all, and it's okay to have your bad days and when you're not feeling positive. And it can
Th-
feel like pressured now that I am not feeling like that when I'm doing this, but it shouldn't be the case.
I think there's a very valid point that you've made, Shoma, that you see it everywhere in social media these days about being positive all the time. I mean, it,
Right.
it, it doesn't make sense that way. It's okay to feel low on certain days and bounce back with your resilience, uh, as and when that comfort level comes back, or you're working on yourself, or you're seeking some help from a practitioner. Um, yeah, it definitely makes sense. It's a good point that you have made, then, that people should actually look at it. It's not all about 24 by 7 being in that state of good.
Yeah. In fact,
Absolutely.
it's become like a semantic thing in the media. Like it's like a sign. So if you see pink flowers, one candle, and something, automatically it's supposed to make you feel like you're going to feel good. But I mean, that's problematic messaging, especially in times like now when so many of us are alone or not in contact with as many people. And when you feel like and Instagram is what you go to then, and then you see all this, it actually makes you feel worse.
Absolutely. I think I can completely relate to it when I look at it, and in fact, when the practitioners or those who are into the field are putting it across in that manner. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's a very different way of looking at the entire situation. मतलब हाँ, हम सबको encourage कर रहे हैं, हमको ऐसा लग रहा है कि हम सबको encourage कर रहे हैं कि you have to be positive and you have to come back to it, and the way you said that you go girl, and you're trying everything out and out there to make the other person feel, but maybe at that point it's not getting the person to feel good about it. It might make them feel more worse. ये मुझे तो वैसे ही खराब लग रहा है, इसको देख के और खराब लगता है,
Right.
right? I can completely, and I think when we discuss what could people actually do instead of just putting on those positive messages, there would be some suggestions that you feel that they should have. Uh, I mean, they are kind of being encouraging, but yeah, maybe at times it doesn't help. What do you think they should be doing instead of just putting these messages?
In fact, sometimes you see really nice posts saying, be with the person, be silent but be by their side. I saw this
Yeah,
very nice thing that said 10 different ways to ask, how are you? How was your day? We generally feel like, okay, how are you? You expect to not hear anything new. But can you take that one question a little deeper and just tell somebody, I am interested in what you did today. Okay, what were your thoughts? What was the one thing that added meaning to your day? There are so many ways to do this and show people your empathy and concern rather than bypassing it, saying all's going to be well, things are going to be great. So yeah.
true. And it looks as if it's just very much in the moment, or very much on the surface level. हाँ, पूछने के लिए तुमने पूछ लिया कि how are you doing or how was your day, but are you actually ready to commit that time to that person, to sit down and ask that person, that give that 100% attention to the person, that how was it, or
Exactly.
uh, just tell me what all things you did. I'm
Even
so
if
much
it's
interested
amazing.
in knowing. I mean,
Yeah.
really, I think that's the very valid point that you've made. Lovely.
Absolutely.
One more question that I have, Shamu, for you is, since we're discussing the subject, and what would be the main focus of positive psychology for all the students, as well as for people who are watching us, to know why or
Uh,
what focus is of positive psychology?
right. I think the main focus of it, especially for people who are not students, I think, is to engage with it and take what they want. It's very limiting when we think that mental health is a sort of a privilege of people who are teaching it, learning it, or practicing it. Right? People know how to help themselves, and not everyone has to come to therapy for that. So I think this is one of the ways in which you can give some agency back to lay people at least. So, and there are people who are interested, and there are these resources available all over the positive psychology sites. The UPenn site also has so many resources. I think for them, positive psychology can be anything they want it to be based on what part of their life they want to work with. So the main focus again then is the fact that I am able to understand something about myself and hopefully take it into stride and make a change if I want to make, cultivate a practice if I want to make, know who I want to be. A lot of these traits that are there in the value survey, these are not things you will become overnight. But these are not things our parents talk to us about. These are not things we also end up talking to our children about. So this, I think, finally has created and made a vocabulary for understanding strengths, which we can aspire to tomorrow, 1 month from now, 1 year from now, 10 years from now. It's nice to see somebody laying down pathways to a better way of living, whatever it may be for you. I think for students, uh, since we're talking about mental health, I think the way we do mental health, like I said, we leave a lot out. I always tell my students that if there's one thing that you learn in 2 years with me, don't go out and label. Okay, don't go out. So your parents may say, "Oh, to wo schizophrenic hai." You have learned, right? 2 years of masters. Don't go out and do that. And I think that's exactly. I think that's the core over here for me. That if you study psychology, especially if you study positive psychology, allow that to change you such that you are different with people. It's not about what marks you get in one paper in this year. It doesn't matter. Everyone gets a marks. Everybody passes with a master's. But how have you allowed this subject to touch you and really change you such that when you go out and relate to people, you're being a little bit more informed, a little bit more human, a little bit more authentic. I think for me, if I was a student, and actually when we were students, we didn't have the paper, I think. But I think this is what would be the main human focus. I know academic focus lies elsewhere, but that's one thing. Another thing is that, I mean, when you generally, I mean, I've asked, I think everybody who studied psychology knows this. When you tell people you're studying psychology, the first thing people tell you is, "Can you read my mind?"
Yeah,
Like
that's such a
everyone
common,
has, right?
yeah,
And
absolutely
then
agree
when
to
you
that.
actually speak to a lot of people, unless they know you closely, they don't really know what we're studying. They think it's something to do with the mind, and that's all. But when you actually look at the handbooks of positive psychology, they have chapters on psychology of humor, right? They have chapters on, I mean, such interesting and such diverse things that, I mean, I think you can do a lot with that. I mean, right now we are generating so much content. One of the chalks of our work now has become mental health literacy, right?
Mhm.
Imagine the kind of messaging you would write if it was positive psychology informed. So, the way you
Mhm.
present mental health, not everyone is going to go out and become a clinical psychologist or a counselor. They don't have to.
Right.
But even the way you speak, write, conduct yourself, if you've gone through this paper and allowed it to change you, I think you'd be a different person. And for me, that would be the biggest takeaway for the paper.
Lovely. Yes. Um, so what are the elements of positive psychology that the student should keep in mind?
Elements, one, that you need to see it operating in life to learn it. Like I said, it's not something you can pick up from the book. A lot of things will overlap, and that's because of the way these concepts work itself. You need a
Mhm.
lot of nuance. You can't take it literally. Sometimes, for instance, a lot of times when we do research, people who work with optimism, so when you work with optimism, the findings are generally a little interesting because lack of optimism does not mean pessimism, right? So
Right.
I think a healthy dose of common sense when you're absorbing positive psychology is important, because otherwise some people will feel like, when they do research, they take 5 positive psychology variables, then they don't know what to do with it. So I think for students, like, healthy dose of common sense, some amount of understanding that, happiness, subjective well-being, flourishing, I know they're three different things, but they're also somewhere similar. So when you work with these concepts, understanding that just because someone has defined it that way doesn't mean it is only that way. It can be many other ways. Not to take things literally. So I understood it like this, so it will be like that alone. understanding the nuances of it, understanding how these concepts feel in life. So that's why I tell students sometimes that, when you're not feeling optimistic, are you almost always feeling pessimistic? No, because it's not like that. Lack of one thing doesn't have to be the other thing directly. So it takes something to understand the nature of these um, these elements. If you can keep in mind, I think it helps. Another thing, of course, like I said, this comes from the lived experiences of people, from where they are in the lifespan. When you want to understand wisdom, you have to understand that wisdom also happens with age. So Erickson, so you can use two lenses: positive psychology and lifespan, positive psychology and values, positive psychology and mindfulness, to probably get better understanding of just the variable on its own, because then I think it stays a little bookish. Yeah, I think these are the things. Couple of other things. So whenever you try to make a concept very real to life, you lose some validity. We call it the reliability validity trade-off.
Right.
So when you do an
Right.
experiment in a lab, it's a great experiment, but it's not true to life. And when you do an experiment in life, it's not scientific enough. I think positive
Right.
psychology has a very tough job balancing these two. We love the subject because it's talking about things in life, but we wanted to make sense of like this caused this. It's not possible. So, which is why I'm saying important to understand those concepts as how they would unfold in life and not get stuck in. So, someone who has high self-esteem is always going to feel great. It's not like that. Those nuances and individual differences, which is a hallmark of our work with psychology, have to be your default setting on top of which that you study positive psychology.
Very well. I think that makes sense. So there's one question from the audience about is my voice or our voice still low? I think I've put it to the maximum volume. I hope you guys can hear it clearly. So the question from goes like this from Ganesh. It is that difference between clinical psychologist and a positive psychology.
Right. So far, actually, we don't have any programs in India which anyway certify anybody as a positive psychologist. If you mean the disciplines, clinical psychology is hardcore assessment, some amount of therapy, and knowledge of what it means to be mentally ill, along with fundamentals of psychology. So, somebody who is a clinical psychologist would have had basic training in all these papers: cognition, biopsychology, research, but their training would be primarily in understanding what psychological disorders are, how do
Right.
you assess it, mainly, and some amount of therapy. Positive
Right.
psychology, like I said, right now, I don't know if there are too many like training mainframes for it, but what you would do or what you would expect in a positive psychology professional is working with you towards your parts of growth, working with skills, qualities which can maximize your potential. So I think somebody who's working with coaching perhaps would work from a
Yes.
positive psychology because it's its strengths
Yes.
and it's like a building up and a growth oriented process. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, I'm sure Ganesh, this answers your question. And let me see if there's any other question from anybody. No, I'll go get back to my questions. How does positive psychology, Shomu, help in an individual practice? And if you could share any experience or a case study from your practice.
From my own practice. Uh,
Or a
so
case
I think,
study.
right. No, I'm just trying to think of what I actually do because I love the paper.
Sure.
I think for me, I mean, just to give you a personal example, I think I need to live when I can make sense of my life. Otherwise, it's very difficult. I can't be like, okay, things will happen or it's happened. I don't want to engage with it. I think positive psychology is good for someone who's a meaning junkie like that for me, because writing about it or just as getting into what does this experience mean for me, what part of my values are compromised here, and that's why it's difficult. I think in that sense, if you are a little bit sort of aware and you want to do something about a situation or you want to understand it, positive psychology gives you those tools. For instance, a value assessment, understanding that meaning matters to you. I think when you combine these two things, you read about it, you're struggling with it, you apply it to yourself, it does help. I think a lot of people are into gratitude journaling.
Yes.
It is not something it's not something people are doing just for fun, because I just was speaking to a client last week who said his first 3 days he did it. He realized it wasn't working because he was looking for objective things. Then he changed and he shifted to this point where he started looking at when was he feeling grateful. He said it was when he was making his cup of coffee and sitting to work. He said I was feeling glad that I was taking the trouble to start my day on a good note. What it does is when you maintain a constant reflective activity like that, is that it helps you notice in very fine detail your thoughts becoming sort of your sensations, becoming your perception, becoming your emotion and thought. Normally we don't pay attention, right? We are constantly on the move. So when you bring in a practice like that of either mindful breathing, so you stand at the end of your day and you just take 3 minutes and you breathe in, breathe out, you return to yourself, and then you close your day. These are all signals to the nervous system in our body. It's not even something that you're doing to feel good. It's telling your nervous system that I am regulated, I'm able to regulate myself. Similarly, gratitude journaling, like I said, it's allowing you to see that I actively did something which made me feel more in charge or control. These are very important things from a mental health perspective, because when I have depression, I could be feeling like my day is completely wrong, I am completely wrong, there's nothing I can do. Big things will help, of course, CBT will work, whatever else that you do, but these small things which a client is able to do for themselves actually bring back the sense of, okay, I am able to do it, which is a very big thing. Agency is a very big thing. The way we normally practice therapy, we feel like we are helping the client, but when the client knows that I can use to help myself, that's something else. So
Right, absolutely. Any other case study? I think this was very interesting. If there's any other case studies, because I think now I am out of questions, and if you could share some case studies, that would be a great learning for our participants also, and the students who would be there online to watch us.
right, so some real things that actually I learned, because my students went out in the field last year and they
Yeah.
went in groups and they interviewed people who had been resilient, which
Mm-hmm.
was like a real thing. So, I mean, to put it very simply, one of them, I think they went to this cafe in Marol,
Yeah.
which is run by, it's called Bombay to Barcelona. It had shut down in between, it's reopened again. It's run
Yeah.
by this person who I think was left out on his own. He lived on the streets, then he was picked up by a Christian home, and they took care of him. And one fine day, an NGO came and asked him, if you want one thing, what it is, like the Dream and Dream Foundation kind of thing. So he said, I want to go to
Right.
Barcelona because he was into football. And so they funded his trip there, and how he
Wow.
has now taken that and he's opened that place, and everybody who's in the cafe over there actually is not there because they're going to be working there. There are people who come from slums and disadvantaged backgrounds, but they are working over there to get some skills, build on their confidence, and then somehow they're going to receive funding to go on with their actual goals in life, which could be fashion designing in Italy. One of the people over there is also training in fashion designing in Italy. It's such a beautiful way to bring together resilience, altruism, and a sense
Yes.
of community. We tend to think that mental health is something I am doing with myself, right?
Oh,
We forget that mental health will be so much easier when we work in tandem with our families, with our communities. We were not meant to live in isolation like this. That's why it's doing us so much damage. So when you're
yes.
able to that, I mean, when I've been to that cafe and I was so like, the energy is something else, because you know the stories of the people who went there and how resilient they must have had to be. In his Instagram page or something, he speaks about having to have eaten from a dustbin at some point, and he runs a cafe now, and they give food free to students who are like kids who are outside on the road. So it was such a positive psychology cycle, if you ask me. Like, it began with
Yes.
distress, adversity, then it went to resilience, meaning. Then he came back and he's giving it back to people. So it's very, very beautiful.
That is quite touching. That is quite touching, and I hope as a community we practice it, because I think as you rightly said that we need it in a larger amount, because कहाँ तो ऐसा लगता है कि हम न्यूक्लियर हो गए हैं. We just try to think about our mental health and our things, and it's not happening. There's no reciprocation that's happening, you know,
And it
which
makes
actually
you feel
builds
like,
the community.
right,
Sorry, I didn't
it
get
makes
you.
you feel like
Could
you're
you?
alone. It makes you feel like all of this
Yes.
I only do. I have to do my work. I have to do my self care. So, but if you, for instance, see, like, I mean, I think a lot of people are parents' age, they go for these walks in groups. That's not just
Huh.
about the walk. That's about, them having a space where, they are speaking, others are speaking to them, the worldviews are similar. Social support is not something, I mean, you can't take it for granted, and we've become very insulated. Our culture is not like that. We feel like, I mean, I know people who've gone to the US to meet their kids, and they are like, what kind of a culture is this? People call and ask if you're free, then they'll come. Ours, I mean, there are families we know where they make extra dinner because someone or the other will come home.
Come,
Because
yeah,
of the
yeah.
way we work now, we've become isolated from our own values, and that somewhere is detrimental to our mental health because we were not wired to be alone.
Very well, very well. I think that really uh, 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 truly makes sense in current times, and especially in this time of this pandemic, uh, to work or be around as a community to support each other in ways that is possible. So, what has your takeaway been as a practitioner of positive psychology or as an academician of positive psychology? How has, if you would like to, if you could share your experience?
I think so. One of the nicest things about the paper is this paper is a joy to teach. Students love it and they engage with it. And usually we do this in Sem 2 when their other papers are stats, which they don't like as much. So my students, both years, I think they love the paper. And somewhere that itself makes me want to teach it even more. But as a person, I think, like I said, I'm somebody who's looking to make sense of life. And for me, I think psychology, studying it, training in it, doing research in it, and now doing therapy in it, none of it has been about psychology because I don't think, with due respect to chemistry, chemistry does not change who you are. I guess. Okay. I mean, if there are anyone from that background, I respect you. But with psychology, you can't afford to be that way. Who I am as a psychology teacher, as a psychology researcher, or a counselor is also in large part who I am. And I think that's the big privilege of being in this field because you get to constantly, you get to know yourself, you get to work on yourself, and you get to be with other people who are trying to do the same thing. And you can do this in various ways. I think positive psychology does sort of put a sense of connectedness, does bring in a sense of, we are meant for something better than this, and that it's okay to look for something larger. Otherwise, people feel like, I failed on this test and that's done, or, I am not going to get that, I'm not going to be this. And sometimes when we play small in our lives, we end up small also, right? Positive psychology, I think, finally makes it valid to have aspirations, which is, I mean, you could be in a relationship which is problematic today, but again, romantic growth versus romantic destiny, it's leaving that agency in your hand. How do you want to understand it? Similarly, like resilience, similarly, courage, wisdom, so many things which we see out there, and you feel like that happens in the movies. This is brought it to our books, papers, and our lives, and I think that's the best thing about it. um, Another thing that I think it does very well now that I'm thinking of it in research also is that it allows you, like, for instance, something like coping. So
Hmm.
when I was doing my PhD, I was working with cancer caregivers, and one of the things I did for my research is I looked at how they cope, and I had the scope to do my analysis independently and see if Indians cope differently. Indians did. For instance, when we study from the West, and right now, not just psychology, everything that we see in our lives, we import it from a reference to the West, right? Which is
Yes,
a problem.
yeah,
When I did my study and I did my analysis, what I finally found out is for Indians, religion is support. Okay,
yes,
in the
yes.
West, religious
Fine.
beliefs of that kind would be felt to be fatalistic because the individual is the focus of the society there. But over here, our religious systems, our collectivistic systems, our value systems are the focus. So over here, when a mother was telling me about her child, that, my child is too good for this world, and if my child has to die of cancer, it's because he's fulfilled his duties. We think, what is this person saying? But that's the way they are making sense, and that is their religion or spirituality coming to save them from a truth which is intolerable at that moment. This sort of an understanding comes only when you probably shift the lens a little bit and see if that concept applies to you. Similarly, I think so many of these Buddhist practices, ideas inherent to Jainism, actually also like a common humanity, right? That there is life in everything is very, very liberating. It was always there with us, but we let it go, or we moved away from it. We thought, being modern, meant to leave these beliefs behind. But now they're coming back to us with positive psychology, and you realize that we have been speaking of these things for so many centuries, right? So it's very reaffirming. It also helps you see yourself as a part of a legacy. So I think that's what's beautiful about it.
Lovely. I think we are almost heading to the end of the session, and before we wrap up the session, what would be your advice or words of wisdom for budding psychologists or students?
Mm, I think dive deep first thing. I mean, you don't get into psychology and do it at the surface, because there is so much joy of just learning to this. And if you start liking it for that purpose, then you don't care what exam, what research, nothing really feels like a pressure. And I think my biggest takeaway is allow the subject to change you, right? So when you enter a program and when you exit it, you should not be the same person that went in. You probably can find those depths in you, and if you get in touch with those depths in you through the subject, you probably will sense changes in other parts of your life, whether it is career, whether it is relationships, or whether it is a purpose, passion that you have, which may even get you to realize that psychology is not your passion. But if you got that awareness from here, take that awareness, carry that kindness, and offer it to people around you.
Very well, thank you. I think that's a great takeaway for our viewers and the students, or as a general audience. Thank you, I think, so much, Shomu, for such a great insight on the topic of positive psychology. Um, I think here our viewers would have learned a lot about it. And if at all you have any questions, still after the session, you can put it in the comment section, and we can maybe Shomu can connect on the Facebook page of ICHARS and help you understand that. And we can otherwise share her details with you. So that she can help you to understand more about the subject. And yes, I would like to wrap up the session, and I had a wonderful time hosting you. Thank you so much, Shoma, to come on this platform to share your wisdom about positive psychology. And thank you, everybody else who have been there with us on Facebook Live for being such a wonderful audience. Though I was missing a lot of questions today, but I'm looking forward to have lots of questions in the next time in the session. So I'm also going to see you guys in the next session on the next Friday. I'll keep you posted with who would be our guest and what would be the subject in a day or two. And yeah, next Friday, 7:30 p.m. Facebook Live on PsyTalks with psychology teachers. Uh, so have a lovely weekend, and thank you so much once again. Thank you, Shumu, for coming. Do you have any last words to say to the audience before we wrap it up?
I hope some people feel a little bit more interested in positive psychology. Yeah, that's what.
Like,
Thank you. Thank you.
lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to go offline for. So there's one question I think before I think it's just coming. What are the benefits of? I'm taking it up. I hope you don't mind it, Shamu. Okay. So the question goes like that. What is the benefits in NPPA membership in India? I don't know what is NPPA.
Positive. Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay,
Yeah. I think there's a membership. There's an international association. There's also a national association. I think
okay,
you will
okay.
get their publications and you will get notifications. And I think that if there are conferences, then I think you get to be a part of all of that. Yeah.
Okay. So I hope Ganesh that answers your questions before I sign off. Thank you so much, everyone. And time to go offline and see you on next Friday, 7:30 p.m. with another interesting topic in psychology and another expert in house.